हेलो गुड मॉर्निंग एवरीवन। हम लोग रिप्रोडक्शन इन ऑर्गेनिजम्स में वी हैव बीन सीइंग सेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन, और आपको पता है सेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन देयर आर थ्री इवेंट्स: प्री फर्टिलाइजेशन इवेंट्स, देन फर्टिलाइजेशन, एंड द लास्ट वन इज पोस्ट फर्टिलाइजेशन इवेंट्स। तो आज हम बाकी बचे हुए जो कुछ स्टेप्स हैं उनको करके इस चैप्टर को कंक्लूड करेंगे। लेट अस हैव अ क्विक रिकैप कि हमने अभी तक क्या देखा है। हमने सेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन में देखा है गेमीटोजेनेसिस, द वेरी फर्स्ट स्टेप। उसके बाद गेमीट्स का ट्रांसफर हम लोग बात कर चुके हैं, एंड हमने वी हैव टॉक्ड अबाउट टाइप्स ऑफ फर्टिलाइजेशन, एक्सटर्नल फर्टिलाइजेशन एंड इंटरनल फर्टिलाइजेशन. So gamete transfer we have seen in case of animals, where uh, gametes that are produced in male's body like sperms, they are transferred to the body of female where lies the egg and fertilization takes place. But in case of flowering plants, that is angiosperm, आपको पता है pollen grain जो होता है, हाँ उसमें ट्रांसफर, pollen grain जो होता है उसके थ्रू गेमीट का ट्रांसफर कैसे होता है. So let us see a picture. This is an electron micrograph. Here you are able to see these are what? Pollen grains, and these are pollen tubes, right? They have germinated on stigma of what? Carpel. See, here I have drawn a carpel. This is a carpel, and this carpel has three parts. This is ovary, and this is style, and here you have pollen grain. Not just pollen grain, I should write germinating pollen grain. And this tube is known as pollen tube. So what is seen in this picture is, these are ovules, and these ovules are present on placenta inside the ovary. So what is happening? The pollen grain that has male gametes in it, two male gametes are there in a pollen grain, is transferred onto the stigma, and the process is known as pollination. The process is called pollination. So what is pollination? Pollination is transfer of pollen grains on what? Stigma of carpel. So this is the definition of pollination. So pollination brings the pollen grain onto the stigma where they germinate to produce what? A pollen tube. See, this is the growing pollen tube, and this pollen tube is passing through style. Pollen tube passes from inside of the style. Once they reach the swollen part, that is ovary, what? They would get their entry into the ovule, and they would release these two what? These are two male gametes inside the ovule. See, these are ovules. Here lies inside ovule, you have the female gamete called, inside ovules you have female gamete called egg, that is female gamete. Once male and female gamete, they come nearby, they come close, the process of fertilization takes place. Right. So this is very important diagram in which you are seeing a germinating pollen grain, and the germinating pollen grain has what? Two male gametes inside the pollen tube. Now this pollen tube passes through the style, and what? It reaches the swollen part of the carpel, that is ovary. This is fertile part of the carpel. There lies what? Ovule. Ovule is present on this placenta, and ovules have a opening called micropyle through which pollen tube enters the ovule और वहां जाके क्या करती है, pollen tube burst होती है और उसमें से दो मेल गेमीट्स रिलीज होते हैं. ओव्यूल्स के अंदर क्या प्रेजेंट होता है, एग. सो दिस इज व्हाट गेमीट ट्रांसफर इज. आई होप इट्स very much clear. This is an electron micrograph in which there are pollen tubes. You are seeing pollen tubes, and this is what pollen grain that is germinating. So after transfer of male gamete, one male gamete that fuses with the female gamete and produces what, zygote. And the way we have seen in case of animals in the previous lecture, the male gamete as well as the female gamete, they are haploid in nature, and the zygote is always what, diploid in nature. So this is the event that is taking place inside ovule in what, angiosperms. Here in this picture, you are able to see two gametes. These are two gametes, and these two gametes are free swimming. Free swimming gametes of what, algae. And because both of them are same, we call them isogametes. Here the male and female gamete, they have different structure. We won't call them isogametes, we call them heterogametes, right? But here the term isogametes is used, that we have seen in the lecture of gametogenesis. And same way, two gametes, I can say this is male gamete, this is female gamete, because both of them are similar in structure and morphology. The term isogamete has been used here. And when these two gametes, they fuse, they produce what, zygote again, which is diploid, right? See, in case of algae, fungi, the zygote covers itself with thick covering. See, this is the thick covering. Let me use another color. This is the thick covering. This is a thick covering. And becomes a dormant structure. Sometimes it is called zygospore. This is dormant structure. And what do we mean by dormant structure? Means it passes unfavorable conditions. It passes unfavorable conditions in this what, dormant state. Dormant state, it passes unfavorable conditions of desiccation, heat, cold, right? So if I put forward an example, क्या होता है, आप देखते हैं जब बरसात होती है तो you have pits and you have dried ponds that are filled up again by water. They are filled with water, and all of a sudden the water turns green. What happens? Because in those pits, उन गड्ढों में या उन तालाबों में क्या होता है, there are dormant structures, zygospores, and sometimes they are also called oospores. Right? Oospore, they are also called oospores. ये oospores क्या करते हैं? जर्मिनेट करते हैं और क्या करते हैं? वेजिटेटिव स्ट्रक्चर बना देते हैं एल्गी का, एंड द वाटर टर्न्स इनटू ग्रीन वाटर, है ना, ग्रीन हो जाता है. तो क्या था लास्ट टाइम जब एल्गी थी उसमें, सी there are rains till mid of September or sometimes October. By November, the water is evaporated in certain ponds. In some ponds, they may be there till last of December, January. But in most of small pits, क्या हो जाता है, छोटे तालाब, जो नाले हैं उनमें क्या होता है, ये पानी सूख जाता है. And once what this water dries up, उसमें एल्गी क्या करती है, सेक्सुअल रिप्रोडक्शन के थ्रू डॉर्मेंट स्ट्रक्चर ऊस्पोर या जाइगोस्पोर बना देती है. वो उस पानी में डॉर्मेंट, उस सॉइल में, उस पिट में डॉर्मेंट पड़ा रहता है, एंड इट पासेस इट्स अनफेवरेबल कंडीशंस ऑफ टेम्परेचर, विंटर्स, और वो उसी स्टेट में क्या करता है, पास करता है. देन नवंबर, दिसंबर, जनवरी, फरवरी, मार्च, अप्रैल, मई, द स्क्रोचिंग हीट, और उसमें भी क्या होता है, जाइगोस्पोर, ऊस्पोर, दैट इज देयर इन डॉर्मेंट स्टेट, पड़ा रहता है वहां. एंड क्या होता है, नेक्स्ट मॉनसून सीजन की जब रेन्स आती हैं इन द मंथ ऑफ जुलाई, क्या होता है, वो अगेन जर्मिनेट करता है एंड इट टर्न्स द वाटर ग्रीन. सो ये आपको पता होना चाहिए कि अनफेवरेबल कंडीशंस में ही क्या करता है, जो एल्गी है या फंजाई है, दैट reproduces sexually, right? That I must write here. Let me write it here. Algae reproduces by sexual reproduction only at the onset of what? Unfavorable conditions. And what are the unfavorable conditions for algae? That is desiccation, that is dryness, पानी की कमी हो गई है, सूख गया है पानी, and temperature. So after fertilization, let us see post-fertilization events. See, in post-fertilization events, we have divided them into two parts. One is zygote formation, right? And another is embryogenesis or zygote formation. Zygote formation is where it's external or it is internal. If it's external, it is in water. It is in water, like we discussed in case of animals like frog, right? In fishes. Similarly, it is in water in case of algae, right? And zygote formation is internal in case of plants like what? Bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, angiosperms, and zygote formation in mammals, birds, etc. The zygote formation is inside the female's body. Now, once zygote has been formed, it has to divide and make the embryo. So the next step that follows zygote formation is embryogenesis, and in embryogenesis there is formation of embryo. formation of embryo from the from zygote that is produced after fertilization. So the process of formation of embryo is called embryogenesis. Right? Can you tell me any plant in which there is no embryo formation? Can you tell me? Yes, it is. There is no embryo formation. No embryo formation in what? In algae and what? Fungi, because they have who have haplontic life cycle, haplontic type of life cycle. They don't have embryo. It's a very important concept. So there is no embryo formation in case of algae and fungi. Rest of the plants, that is bryophytes, pteridophytes and gymnosperms, angiosperms, they all have embryo. In animals, there is embryo, right? The embryo then develops into fetus. Can you tell me what would be the type of divisions that would take place? Can you tell me? What are the type of division in zygote? See, when I said there is no embryo in case of algae and algae and fungi. Here, in algae and fungi, divide by what? They divide by meiosis. Remember, at the time of gametogenesis, we have talked about formation of gametes in haploid organisms is through mitosis. So in them, there is no gametangial meiosis. It is zygotic meiosis. We call it zygotic meiosis. Therefore, zygotic meiosis. Algae and fungi divide by, I should write zygote of algae. Zygote of algae and fungi divide by meiosis, and they produce what? They produce haploid spores. Sometimes they are called, because they are produced by meiosis, they are also called meiospores. Now, in other organisms, bryophytes up to angiosperms and animals, zygote divides by what? It divides by mitosis and produce diploid embryo. The process we call as embryogenesis. I hope this very concept is clear to all of you. Right? When or in what animals or plants or organisms zygote divides by meiosis and where it divides by mitosis. Now, post-fertilization events in animals. See, you have already seen that development in some animals is external, means birds, they lay eggs. Which eggs? Fertilized eggs. So they are called oviparous animals. So animals that lay eggs, or I should write fertilized eggs. Example is birds. They are called oviparous animals. And what are viviparous then? They give birth to young ones. Similar to them. See, I'm saying similar to them, not identical to them. See, from very first class, I've been telling you reproduction, sexual reproduction brings about changes where parents give birth to offsprings similar to them, not identical. Identical means carbon copy. So they have variations. Of course, they are similar. They have two hands, they have two legs, they have two eyes, but the features are different. You can identify them as individuals. They are not exactly carbon copy of the parent. So viviparous animals, they give birth to the young ones similar to them. They feed them. They have mammary glands, and the example is all mammals. Of course, there are a few exceptions. If you have heard about Echidna, the platypus, they are mammals, but they are oviparous. So let us not talk about exceptions here that you might have seen in the chapter Animal Kingdom. So majority of animals are viviparous and oviparous are birds. Can I say reptiles are also? Reptiles are also oviparous, right? Now, what are the post-fertilization events in case of plants? See here, this is very important. I drew a carpel. See, this is a carpel that I drew earlier. Here you had placenta. On this placenta, there is ovule, and inside ovule, there was what? There was egg, and the egg got fertilized by a male gamete, and it turned into what? This is zygote. This is what? Ovule. And this swollen portion is what? Ovary. So plants, I should write pre-fertilization. Before fertilization, it was ovary. After fertilization, I'm writing here post-fertilization, or I should write after fertilization. The ovary turns into what? It turns into fruit. So all the fruits that we are eating today, once upon a time, they were ovaries, right? Ovule, that is after fertilization, it is converted into what? Seed. All the seeds that we are eating today, once upon a time, they were ovules present inside the ovary. And zygote, this zygote converts into what? Embryo. So these are three very important concepts. Ovaries after fertilization convert into fruit. See, tomato is also a fruit. Brinjal is also a fruit. From botanical point of view, everything that develops from ovary is a fruit. This classification that brinjal is a vegetable, tomato is a vegetable, watermelon is a fruit, apple is a fruit that has been divided by us only. But botanical point of view says everything that develops from ovary is a fruit. So brinjal is also a fruit. The pod of the pea is also a fruit. Yes, everything is fruit that develops from ovary. Yes, this human civilization, we have been taught in society that everything that we cook and then eat is vegetable, but the things that we eat raw is fruit. But botanical point of view, everything that develops from ovary is a fruit. So brinjal is also a fruit, tomato is also a fruit. Now, what other parts are there? Can you tell me what other parts are there in the flower? Anybody? What other parts are there in the flower? We'll discuss that in coming class. But for now, other parts of flower like calyx, corolla. Then we have what? Stamens. Then we have style, stigma. All they fall off. Fall off means they wither away after fertilization. But sometimes this part, that is calyx, is there. Sometimes you see persistent calyx in, can you tell me? Yes, in brinjal. You can see that in tomato, or in case of pea, you are able to see. Brinjal, tomato and pea, they have persistent calyx. What is the structure like? If you have seen brinjal, this upper part that you remove while cooking it, this green part, can you tell me what is it? Of course, this is the calyx, and I call this persistent calyx. Similar calyx is there in case of tomato. It's there in case of what? See, if you have seen a tomato, you would find here you have what? Persistent calyx. So this is again an example of persistent calyx. Pea also you would find the same thing. So this is brinjal. This is what? Tomato, where you find persistent calyx. So here we come to the end of this chapter, and later we start with sexual reproduction in angiosperms. So thank you.